Okay, good afternoon everyone. So today would be my class, right? I think you had two classes regarding introduction and approaches by Mohanty sir, right? So I will be today dealing with the paradigms of public administration, that is your topic second, and definitely a lot of questions are asked from this also. Fine, before we enter into the actual topic, right, as you might have understood in the previous classes, the domain and the scope of public administration is evolving, probably not in a very linear way, not in a very, you can say, defined manner, but in a very erratic manner, mainly because the traditional content of the discipline, the traditional approach to the study of subject has not totally vanished. It has not totally been discarded, whether by the scholars or by the practitioners. One thing that will help you understand this, maybe through an example, is the dominant role of the police or the authority systems in the society, mainly in the developing countries. And not just in the developing countries, also in the developed countries like US, the typical case of a racial discrimination by a police officer or a black man, fine, physically abused by a police officer, which became a big reason for conflict, or you can say public unrest in USA. Same is also visible in the context of Europe, where you see large-scale migration or immigrants entering, and many of the countries tightening their laws regarding immigration. Or for that matter, France, where you see the religious freedom, the secularism, or the very notion of secularism is under or endangered, right, as per the various incidents that have taken place, right? I'm not specifying a typical religion or a typical incident, but in general, many of these countries where you see the emergence of rightist governments, right, the national or nationalist dominated views are primarily because of the revival of the, again, authoritarian way of governing. I would not say a dictatorial way, but more or less authoritarian way of governing, where authority still is supposed to be primary or the most prominent variable defining the scope and evolution of the society. To what extent? Like in India also we are witnessing such changes, right? Public interest increasing around certain things, whether it is price rise, inflation, petroleum prices, cylinder prices, okay, basic essential prices, or for that matter whatever, right? And more or less the state's perception of such public demands or such public unrest is not necessarily very constructive in nature. So the nature of evolution of subject generally has to collaborate with the nature of evolution of the society. When we are mentioning the word society or collaboration with the society, that does not typically mean only the socio-cultural religious part of the society. That basically means the politico-administrative social relations. The politics, the administration, and the society, that is the citizen engagement, to a large extent is depending upon the way the society or the citizens perceive the role of the state and the administration. As citizens become probably more literate and democratically more conscious, right, their need for a better governance will arise. The need for better governance is a slow process, or you can say better governance itself is a very slow process, and it is not something, a 2-minute noodle which can be cooked and delivered. So definitely the time frame in which this transition will take place and the need of the citizens, which is obviously continuously increasing, there will always be a kind of conflict situation which will emerge, not only in developing countries but in any society. More so prominent in developing countries because of the diversity and the fragmentation of the population that is visible. Territorial fragmentation is also quite prominent. Developmental scenario in certain areas is quite okay, in other it is very backward, right? So there is a steep disparity in certain regions or within a region in certain locations, and this somewhere propels the conflict, probably fuels the conflict further, right? So when you keep this broad aspect in mind, then probably you can appreciate the approaches, this changing scope of the study of public administration, right? Administration initially viewed more as just as a subject, as a discipline, trying to help us understand what the organization or the institution of administration should be, right? Efficient, rational, productive, right? Disciplined, law-based, legal, rational, and all those things. Basically, the theory which was developed was mainly to secure a particular kind of organization for the industrial societies. But neither the industrial process is same today, right? Neither the scope of that industrialization is similar today. Okay, neither the need for such a system is required. So obviously there are various developments which took place as a reaction to the traditional model of administration, which we also call as the Weberian model of administration. Why we use the word Weberian? There are various reasons for that. Obviously, Weber himself never talked about directly an administrative system. Obviously, he was talking about power, authority, and domination. He was a sociologist, and a sociologist is more or mainly concerned with what factors trigger changes in the society, what is the existing status, and what would be the future status of a society, and what are the specific factors which may trigger such changes, right? Obviously, a sociologist is not supposed to study all the changes, but he or she may be interested in mainly understanding a typical particular variable, a typical change, right, which might be more prominent than the others in a particular situation. So Weber was also concerned with that, and he understood or tried to understand that how the changing circumstances of industrialization, right, and declining of monarchies and traditional governance systems, once this decline takes place because of various factors which are happening that you must be knowing, right? Growth of money economy, industrialization, trade, business, literacy, education, rationality, and all those factors, right? Scientific temperament. So once this will happen, so he was more concerned about if these are the social changes which are being witnessed, then generally what will be the kind of governance which will be required to meet the challenges of such societies or such a change in these societies. So his thesis was primarily around developed countries or so-called developed, which were developing then. May not be necessarily useful in developing societies, right? So the traditional theory of public administration and the traditional system of administration which was visualized, they were in collaboration with the circumstances which were there. So what was the need then? The theory was sufficient enough to provide a base for understanding the kind of organization, the kind of functioning which is required to deal with the societal problems. But this is not the case today, because in the post-Second World War scenario, after the emergence of many of the developing societies, this overall understanding or theoretical development changed. Scholars from non-Western countries also started participating in the theory building in public administration. Many notable scholars are there, basically writing in the field of development administration, right? And at the same time, the emergence of independent political and administrative institutions in developing countries also provided, you can say, a diverse focus of the study of public administration. Till now, they were focusing primarily on the Western institutions or Western culture-dominated institutions, but now they had to also understand the non-Western cultural-dominated institutions, mainly which were the product of the British domination or British colonial system, but now they had to give way to the new emerging institutions, right? So one part of their theoretical study was concerned with how the developing countries would cope up with these changes which they are witnessing with the existing traditional system which they have. Many of these developing countries had existing bureaucratic systems already, right? And even if we don't say they were like purely Weberian bureaucracy or they were a copy of the Weberian bureaucracy, which we cannot say, right? Because in Indian context, the administrative system somewhere emerges around Battle of Buxar, Battle of Plassey, and later on after the, you can say, the Regulating Act 1773. Right, so we find the administrative system which was existing a kind of transition of the Mughal and the British administrative system. Fine, whether in the revenue or land administration or policing, right, or local governance and many other areas, we find the kind of hybrid which was emerging. And later on, Britishers, even though they borrowed or they kept certain systems of the British era, of the Mughal era, they brought the necessary modifications required for an imperialistic control. So you can imagine this way that, okay, it was a transition, and obviously later part of the 18th century we had witnessed an administrative system, and probably Weber's theory comes somewhere in 1920, right? So it cannot be called as Weberian bureaucracy, but yes, the features or the structure, the design which was created more or less had Weberian features, or which Weber visualizes later on, right? And it was quite obvious that Weber's theory was not basically a prescription but also a description. It was based on somewhere you can say analyzing the historical systems which existed and how they have evolved over a period of time. So Indian administration, right, or the existence of administration in Indian context, colonial India if I say, or British India if I say, precedes the development of theory by Weber or many other scholars, right? So that will also not be totally correct to say that the Western theories had influenced. No, Western theories had influenced Europe and America, and obviously they had started modifying their administrative systems based on these theoretical developments, but need not necessarily have been impacting the administration in India, right? So it was preceding the theoretical developments which took place, right? So in that scenario, now you have to understand that, okay, how the scope and the approaches, the way we are viewing any particular development in a subject, whether related to the content of the subject, whether related to the theoretical development, whether related to the organizational change, right, or society and administration relation, whatever we are viewing in terms of evolving approaches, right? So approaches are something dynamic in nature. They help you understand how one or the previous one led to the later one, right? Or how the existing is dependent upon the previous. So that is how the relationship is established. So whether you say traditional approaches, right, or classical traditional approaches, and then behavioral approaches or neoclassical approaches and all those things, they are basically intertwined, they are interlinked with each other. Right? And they approaches give us a sense of continuity of how a subject has evolved, how a subject's understanding of society has also evolved.